It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Paula Gerber, who's going to take us through the next panel, which is Challenges in Securing the Rights of Trans and Gender Diverse People. Thank you very much, Paula.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you everyone for being here. It is an absolute thrill to be facilitating this panel, and it segues nicely into the first panel. And I was really delighted to hear you talking about the 7 recommendations for strengthening human rights in Australia, and that number 3 was develop a national human rights education action plan. So I'd just like to take a moment to share with you a story. I started my PhD after leaving Mallesons, which is where Hugh also worked, and I thought a nice segue between my career as a lawyer in the commercial world and my interest in human rights was to look at corporate responsibility for human rights. And I had been doing this for a year, and I got the opportunity to teach human rights in Kosovo not long after the NATO bombing had finished at the University of Pristina. And I prepared all my materials and I went over there, and I had assumed that students would have a basic understanding of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of the UN system, etc. And they didn't. And then I really berated myself. I said, why did I assume that these university students would know about human rights? I didn't learn about it at school. I didn't even learn about it in my law degree. So I came back to my PhD supervisor, Gillian Triggs, and I said, I want to change my PhD topic. I want to look at human rights education and the importance of that and the extent to which we are complying with our obligations to educate students about human rights. And I did a comparative study of the extent to which students in Melbourne secondary schools were learning about human rights compared to students in Boston secondary schools. And the reason I chose those 2 jurisdictions was because Australia has ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the US hasn't. Australia does not have a Human Rights Act, the US does. Which of those 2 things, international law versus a domestic human rights act, was more influential on whether children were learning about human rights in schools? And, no surprises, the winner was a domestic human rights act. Teachers didn't feel like an obligation in the Convention on the Rights of the Child really dictated what they were teaching in schools. And another example which I always point to about the importance of human rights education is South Africa. South Africa was the first country in the world to include a prohibition on discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation in their constitution. They are the only country in Africa that allows same-sex marriage. And yet it is still one of the most dangerous places to be gay. Murders of gay people, corrective rape of lesbians is a regular occurrence in South Africa. The education, the culture, the societal attitudes did not keep up with law reform. And you need the 2. You need the law reform and you need societal attitudes to be in sync. And that's why in all the work that I do now, I spend a lot of time on awareness raising, on education, why I'm so grateful for people like James Brandis in our media and marketing department to get the message out there to the broader community so that we're not just speaking to law students or lawyers. And that's what this panel is all about today. It's about raising awareness and understanding of the human rights of trans and gender diverse people. So in the many years that I've been working in the LGBTIQ human rights space, my research and my advocacy has contributed to a number of really successful campaigns for reform. In 2015, the expungement of convictions for men who had been criminalised in the times when we had laws against same-sex sexual conduct between consenting adults. That was expunged in Victoria in 2015, and Dan Andrews was the first leader in the world to apologise to our community for those laws. And now in Tasmania, we're on the cusp of seeing compensation scheme being set up to pay compensation to the men whose lives were impacted by these laws if they were charged or convicted of offences. I've seen lesbian and single women being able to access fertility treatment. I've seen birth certificate law reform so that same-sex families can have two mothers recorded on a child's birth certificate. I've seen improvements in the way we assess the claims for asylum from LGBTIQ people, banning of conversion practices in a number of jurisdictions, some progress in overcoming the invisibility and erasure of bisexual people, and in some states a removal of religious exemptions from anti-discrimination laws and the criminalising of hate speech and vilification based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And as I've seen all this progress, I've also seen one part of the community that hasn't quite enjoyed the same degree of progress in the respect of their rights, and that's the T in the LGBTIQ acronym. And in fact, we're now seeing a winding back of hard fought for rights in parts of the world that I never thought we would see that, in the UK and the US, for example. So in response to this, my research has narrowed its focus now to the trans and gender diverse community, and I am delighted to have recently finished a book, Sex, Gender and Identity, Trans Rights in Australia, coming to every good bookstore near you on the 1st of September. And so a bit of a shameless plug there. But what I've realised, particularly through the Marriage Equality campaign, is that we can quote all the stats and the facts and figures, and that's not going to change people's minds. What changes people's minds is stories and getting to meet and know people who are different from them. As Hugh said, that proximity. So I'm really thrilled that today we have Charlie Wilson and Isabelle Langley with us. I'm not going to formally introduce them too much because they are going to be telling their own stories, and you're going to get to know them as young trans people, and hopefully their storytelling will help you have a greater appreciation for this community. So I'd like to invite Charlie and Isabelle onto the stage, please. I will start by saying they are both Monash law students. Charlie is a law student who I met at this conference last year. And so that's testament to what a great networking opportunity this is. So please, as Melissa said earlier, take time to meet someone that you haven't met before. And Isabelle is also a Monash student, but doing PPE rather than law, but we won't hold that against her. So I often get asked when I knew that I was gay. And it's a question that I really hate because there was no light bulb moment. It was just something that I always knew about myself. Do you get asked when you knew you were trans, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, a lot. Particularly when I was younger, it was always a big topic. But for me, it was similar. There was no singular epiphany where I figured it out. I'm like, oh, I want to be trans. It was more this slow, over my childhood, build-up of discomfort with boyhood and masculinity. I despised every time people called me, like when you're a little boy, people like, good boy, sent a cringe down my spine. I hated the idea of growing into what I thought was a man's body, and like all of these physical changes that would come with that. It was all just a lot of feelings, really. which I spoke to my parents about constantly. I was trying to like fix it. I was a very sad kid because of those things. And after years and years of talking to them about it, I was taken to a child psychologist child psychiatrist, who introduced me to the concept of gender dysphoria, among other things. But that resonated with me a lot. And when I found out, I don't have to live like that, I'm not resigned to hate myself forever, I was really excited and happy. And yeah, I never really looked back after that.
Great. Charlie, can I ask you the same question? Can you share your journey to realising you were trans?
Mine was a bit different. I'm a Queenslander, and I had grew up in quite a conservative household. So I had those early sort of feelings of not belonging, but I also have an autism diagnosis. So any of those sorts of expressions of feeling wrong in myself was very much been like, it's because you're autistic, not because, you're transgender. And so I think the first time I said that I remember being, I think about 7, and I've got a younger brother and a younger sister, and identifying more with my brother than my sister, and getting really confused and upset by that. And I sort of had expressed that to my mum, and she was, wanting to be welcoming and was like, if you feel like this when you're older, but that was very much, had a lot of pushback from my dad. So every time I expressed myself in my true identity, if I cut my hair, he would get quite frustrated and upset. So for me, I sort of had to internalize a lot of stuff. So I didn't transition until I was an adult. And for me, it got to the point where I was like, it's like a massive act of self-love to transition and to know yourself so well that the whole world can't convince you otherwise of who you are. And I think that, it's every trans person has their own journey, but there are some similarities that I think we all experience. And for me, like knowing that I know who I am and that I have an inalienable sense of self is something that I, as an adult, am very proud of.
That's fantastic. And thank you both for your willingness to share really very personal stories. But this, of course, isn't the first time you've shared your story. Some of the audience might recognise you from your 2014 appearance in Four Corners. Well, not appearance, a whole episode about your transition. What was that like for an 11-year-old to have that sort of spotlight put on you?
It was weird. At the time, I really didn't care, mainly because the whole point of doing that for me was that I was feeling this very existential dread about the laws surrounding access to stage 2 treatment for trans kids at the time, which, if you don't know, is hormone therapy. And at the time, you had to go through the family court and wait till you were 16 in order to access it, which for me would mean that I would have had to eventually at least somewhat start male puberty before getting that treatment, which was terrifying to me because I didn't want a lot of the physical changes that came with that. And I was getting really frustrated with just my country, the fact that no one seemed to care, and for me it was like this felt life or death. Like I couldn't do anything else until this was fixed. So when the opportunity came up to talk about it, I was like, yes, anything that might help. And yeah, so I was far more focused on that at the time, but afterward, the attention that came from it was really surprising to me. I wasn't expecting it to be as big a deal as it was. It was quite at least in Australia, that kind of program hadn't really been run before. And I was really pleased to see the splash it made, the way that it made a lot of other kids feel seen. And it did have a real effect in changing that law. It got a lot of recognition for the issues about that, and eventually allowed me to move forward in trying to affect that kind of change. Yeah.
You must be very, very proud of that. One of the things that really struck me about the program was how much support you had from your parents. And we have a lot of research that shows that members of the LGBTIQ community are overly represented in homelessness, that there a lot of young LGBTIQ people fear rejection from their parents, and that fear is often well-grounded. So you mentioned a bit about your father, Charlie, but did you enjoy the same level of parental support that Isabelle did?
Short answer is no. Long answer is it's been a journey. So for me, my dad and I, we don't have a particularly good relationship, but I don't think that's just trans people. I think everyone, especially members of the LGBTI community, often can have difficult relationships with their family members, but my mum is very proud to say she has 2 sons. We're very close, and she was the one who actually pointed out that it is a gift to know yourself so well. And so, but I find support in lots of other places, and you think about, you have parental love from usually 2 parents, and I might have 50% from my birth parent, but that other 50% has been filled by so many other people, and so many, I've met lots of people through community campaigning, and my partner's family, and educators, and my close friends. My best friend is a cis straight white man, and he's the best ally that anyone could ever ask for. So people, is rejection, and that's something that has been difficult, but there's also been so much love and empowerment, and so I think that kind of outweighs the sort of complex feelings. But families are complicated, and I don't think that's just a trans person's experience. I think that's just people.
Yeah, absolutely, and we certainly talk a lot about family of origin and family of choice, and it's great to hear that you have such a strong family of choice supporting you. A lot of the discussion that we have about trans people is access to healthcare. Now, you featured again on the ABC in the Australian Story episode with Michelle Telfer about...
Television star.
And I'm wondering if you feel that you got the gender care that you needed, gender-affirming care that you needed, when you needed it, and what the transition was like for you from the Children's Hospital to adult healthcare services.
I am very, very lucky to say I do think I got the care I needed when I needed it. And honestly, I had to fight really hard to make that happen, and I was very lucky in a lot of ways. But yeah, I was 14 when the laws around stage 2 treatment were changed, which was just in time for me to start it at the appropriate time to avoid male puberty. And so I got to, basically, that wouldn't have been any different if the law had been changed 10 years prior. And I got really good treatment from the Royal Children's Hospital. They took a lot of really good care of me. They take really good care of everyone who goes through the system, although it's, I'll talk about that later, but it is very difficult to access it sometimes. But transitioning into the adult system was quite hard for me because I had spent almost 10 years at the Royal Children's Hospital. I'd had such a relationship with my doctors, Michelle Telfer in particular. She was my primary pediatrician. And it was hard to say goodbye because I was scared I wouldn't get the level of personal care that I got from them. I felt as though they really cared that what we were doing was best for me. They cared about what made me happy. And I was scared that I wouldn't get that from anywhere else. But luckily, moving into the adult system was relatively seamless. I've found a really good GP eventually. And yeah, I'm quite happy now with how all of that's going. Although I do miss sometimes I had a whole team at the Royal Children's. I miss the community feeling of that a little bit sometimes, but yeah.
Thank you. Charlie, you and I are both refugees from Queensland. What was it like for you moving states, starting university in a new town, and have you experienced any challenges in being recognised as a man here?
So I arrived in Victoria just after the marriage equality plebiscite. So it was after the vote, but before the announcement. So when I moved into my university dorms, the main street of Hawthorne, Glenferrie Road, was covered in rainbow flags. And for me, it was, I think the night before I'd left, I told one of my friends, like, for the first time, like, I think I'm transgender. And so moving like 2,000 kilometres away gave me an opportunity to be able to find myself. And in a place where, at a time where Victoria was quite accepting and quite proudly accepting that. So, yeah, I've been able to feel very at home and be able to grow into myself here, and I'm very grateful for my adopted state. I've been quite lucky, actually, especially in law school, to have a lot of like male friends, and I think that there's these sort of targeted hate towards trans women doesn't quite hit trans men quite as much. There's a little bit more of they're confused girls, or, you know, there's a bit of misogyny in there, but the sort of day-to-day sort of hatred isn't there. And it's also a bit strange when you start getting a bit of male privilege. I feel like I need to sit down and be like, whoa, like, but yeah, I've been quite welcomed. There has been problems with documentation. I don't know if we want to get into that now.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
So I had the unfortunate opportunity of being born in New South Wales. So for those who do not know, New South Wales was the last state to change your ability to change your gender marker on your birth certificate without having a sex reassignment surgery, which isn't actually available in Australia. So for me, because I was born in New South Wales, I appear only in New South Wales Birth, Deaths and Marriages Registry. I grew up in Queensland and lived in Victoria, and I was trying to get my passport renewed. And I had this problem of not having enough identifying documentation that lined up. So I had to go through Birth, Deaths and Marriages Victoria, which allowed me, because I'd lived here for over 5 years, to say, yes, the Victorian government recognises that you're male, you may get you may change this on your driver's licence. From there, I then had to go to the federal government and ask for a specialist form to be able to, when applying for a passport, note that my birth certificate was incorrect. So DFAT had noticed that New South Wales and Western Australia, up until recently, to change your sex marker on your birth certificate in Western Australia, you had to go to the Gender Council, which is like a jury for, you had to go a bunch of people and argue that you are trans and that you should be able to have documentation that reflects that, which I think is quite crazy. So I had to, go through all these loops to just get a passport. And I wasn't able to get a director's ID to sit on a board of directors because I didn't have enough identifying documents that said I was born on this day, I was male. So I sort of was stuck in this sort of legal space. And the frustrating thing was, I don't live in New South Wales. I've never voted in New South Wales, yet I'm bound by the laws of New South Wales. And I was very happy, actually, I remember calling Paula when Alex Greenwich, an independent in the state parliament, put forward a small amendment bill called the LGBTI Amendment Act, that went through and patched up a bunch of existing laws to fall in line with the rest of the country. So changing some wording around people with HIV statuses, and for me personally, changing the Birth, Deaths and Marriages Act so it falls in line with Victoria. So now, after a process that I started 7 years ago, I have a birth certificate. I don't have to give over 10 documents when, trying to apply for a job or a degree. So that was something that was very frustrating, and it's probably been something that, and now I have that passport, but there's also the concern of when I travel internationally with that passport, will I be respected? And I think under the current US administration, if I enter the US on a legitimate Australian passport issued by the Australian government, because it does not reflect the sex I was assigned at birth, I would be entering the US under fraudulent pretenses and could face criminal prosecution.
And we're going to be talking more about international developments in this session. Isabelle, it feels like trans women in particular are increasingly being vilified and persecuted by politicians. Clive Palmer, Mark Latham, Claire Chandler, Catherine Deeves, a candidate, not a politician. What impact do these sort of attacks have on you?
Well, for starters, I would hesitate to say that trans women are particularly attacked. I think it's different between trans women and trans men. I think trans men are equally bad in the sense that they are infantilized, they are treated as more confused, they are kind of erased often from discussions, which I think is also incredibly harmful. But yes, in trans women, it does take the form of more overt vilification, treating us as, like, on the face of it, potential rapists. And it does really affect you. For me, growing up as a trans girl, particularly, I came out when I was 9. I was really like in a fairly fundamental stage of development while absorbing all of this information from the world around me. And it does, like, it affects how you see yourself. You sort of like are trying really hard to like virtue signal innocence to everyone around you just so that they don't assume evil. And I think it is something that I'm able to escape relatively well on a day-to-day basis nowadays because I have the privilege to pass relatively well. But for a lot of trans women, this can lead to violence with people. It can lead to real severe mistreatment, and not just trans women either. It can affect cis women who just don't look the way that people want women to look. It is a really, it's a disgusting prejudice that I really wish people would stop touting, and I think it is just plain harmful. It's not helping anybody. Trans women are vastly more likely to be the victims of violence than to be the perpetrators, more so than almost any other type of woman. It is, yeah, it's really scary, and it can be really hard, but I do think that the more representation we have of trans women, the more trans women we see, like in media, in politics, being normal people, just like anyone else, I think that will whittle away and people will see it for the transphobic, unhelpful stereotype that it is.
Yeah. You mentioned the US. I just recently returned from the United States where I attended the World Pride Human Rights Conference and spoke there, and I was very nervous going there, even as a cis person, just because I've got a bit of a profile in the LGBTIQ space and I have written about Trump, and in the end I sailed through the immigration process even though I landed in Texas, but one of the other keynote speakers, Lady Phil, founded Black Pride in the UK, and her ESTA, the visa waiver, was cancelled without explanation the week before the conference. So she had to give her presentation via Zoom. And it was really a stark contrast to the World Pride Human Rights Conference in Sydney 2 years earlier. That was a joyous occasion. There were flags, progress, rainbow flags everywhere. Sydney Harbour Bridge was closed and a huge march across it led by our Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister. In DC, there was not one politician who showed their face at World Pride. Not even the Mayor of DC was there to welcome us. And the mood was more like a funeral. The trans community is reeling from the tsunami of laws that are targeting them. And I'm not just talking about Trump's executive orders, which are bad enough, but this year alone, there have been 953 bills before federal and state parliaments targeting trans people in one way or another. Healthcare, access to bathrooms, sports, all sorts of things. And of course, in the UK, we also have the decision that came out from the UK Supreme Court in April for Women Scotland that has had a devastating effect on the trans community over there. So my question for you, Charlie, is what is the effect on the trans community here in Australia of these international developments?
I think, I don't know if, I'm sure Isabelle has a similar opinion, but I think there was a real fear, as before our federal election, that we could be going very much down the same route. And I remember opening, to being a Reddit user, Reddit the day after the federal election and going onto r/transgender.au and seeing people just so happy that we'd had a return of a government that doesn't want to single them out as a group that needs to be removed. But it's almost like always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like at any moment, the laws we have that protect us could go. And I think that that's a really difficult way to live. And sometimes you look at yourself in the mirror and be like, am I really the world's worst? Like you would think about with the amount, like 900 pieces of legislation, you're like, wow, that must be a really, really harmful community. And then I'm just a law student that's trying to, pass company law this semester, and remember to do my readings. Like, it's so that can sort of really affect how you see yourself. And I think being in my final year of law school, a lot of students are talking about going overseas for study or exchange, and I'm like, I don't think this is the safest place almost on earth, and there's an incredible sense of gratitude that I live here and are protected by the legislation and by incredible human rights professionals and advocates and academics, many of which are here today. But that stuff can always slip away. I think the Victorian Parliament was doing a investigation into high demand religions, and which is something that affects a lot of people and is a human rights issue in itself. And Moira Deeming suggested that people hijack that to turn it into an anti-trans thing and talking about how transgenderism is a cult. And so even in our own parliament, in our own legal system, there's always a chance that stuff will pop up, and it's a difficult way to live.
You want to share your thoughts on that?
I have had the honour and horror of watching a lot of these debates in Australian parliaments firsthand throughout my teens. So I talked a bit about the changing of laws surrounding stage 2 treatment. We were actually the second last first world country to change that. And now we are one of only, I can't remember the exact number, but less than half of those first world countries have kept that. Now America is similar, where you need to go to court to get access to stage 2 treatment in a lot of states. And that's really terrifying to me, because at the time in 2017, when that got changed, I was kind of feeling like, oh, we're catching up. We were behind. We're catching up to America. I wish I was born in America. It would be so much easier. And now to see that all going backward, it makes me realize all of this progress that I watched happen and that I helped fight for most of my childhood could so easily, in a matter of months, be snapped back, which is really terrifying to me. And I think, again, similar to you with the election, the threat that a Dutton government had using trans people as a political football, the way that they were, I was really scared that that was what was going to happen, and then I'd have to move to bloody Canada or something. And it is, it's really scary. And I shudder at the idea that trans kids today might have it worse than I had it back then, and that's really scary.
Well, certainly trans kids in Queensland do. Yes.
Very much so. And I think in America, Texas alone, I think, has over 200 laws targeting trans kids specifically. And it's really terrifying, the amount of vilification, and it is just because trans people are the decided wedge issue that a lot of conservative people overseas and here have been using for years to try and get some kind of foothold, because it's just a topic that they know a lot of people are not overly comfortable with. And it scares me to see that happening more. Even in Australia, in parliaments, I've seen conservative politicians talk about me specifically as a social contagion, and talking about my teenage body as though it was mutilated, and really, really disgusting things. And what I want more than anything is to just always be going forward. I don't want to be going back. And I find that I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
And I think some two very startling statistics, but in the week leading up to the US election, 47% of all ad buy by the Trump-Vance campaign was anti-trans advertising, 47% nationwide. And in Texas, there is a bill that's not yet passed, but was proposed to make being transgender a felony. I have no
And
comment.
they seem to feel like they can debate trans people and trans kids with impunity without realising the harm that it causes. And we've got a session on the coroner's court coming up later today, but last year there was a coronial finding about the suicide of 5 trans young people. Now, if that's not evidence of the harm that othering and vilifying this community has, then I don't know what is. And I was disappointed that there wasn't more attention paid to the findings of that inquest, which was very much about the systemic discrimination and barriers to trans people living their lives. Isabelle, if you could change one thing in Australia to improve the quality of life for trans women, what would it be?
At this point, I think there is just a wave of small things. I think what I would like most in Australia is for more states, particularly Queensland, to catch up, because I've been incredibly lucky throughout my entire transition, as I'm sure you've been able to tell throughout this conversation. I happen to be born in Australia, probably the best state to be trans in, and I'm really sad that doesn't apply to every Australian, and I would like that to be the case. But I think largely one of the biggest things would just be more social acceptance, more representation, more just pride, I suppose. I feel like oftentimes trans people can kind of fall under the radar a little bit, and I think that contributes to a lot of people's discomfort and the way that people vilify trans people. It's just that they don't know us, they don't see us. And I think that kind of acceptance would just make day-to-day life a lot easier for a lot of people. For me personally, I think one thing I would love is if hormones were covered by Medicare. That would be great. That's small.
Okay. No, but important. Yes, absolutely. Charlie, probably not so much in this room, but in the wider community, when we start talking about policies and regulations and laws, people's eyes can glaze over. Yet laws have a huge impact on your day-to-day life, and I think even influence you deciding to study law. So can you talk to us a bit about policies and laws that have had an impact on your life, for better or worse?
I mean, I did also just previously go on a big rant about birth tests and marriages, so that's been one of the really big policies that had affected my life and had just recently sort of been changed, and it was just the action of one person in the state parliament, again, that I didn't live or vote in, being like, right, this community's been, not fairly treated. So that was one of the really big ones. I'm comforted by the things that, like, we have the Equal Opportunity Act and that we have anti-discrimination legislation and the extended anti-vilification legislation earlier this year. But there's still a bit of a disconnect between the legal framework we have and how we can use it. So I do have a point of privilege being someone who's studying law, so I know that those laws and those protections are there. But for a lot of trans people, even though we've got some decent laws, we're still seeing acts of violence. We're still seeing, people having been discriminated in healthcare, and I think that that's something that I know within the wider space of reproductive healthcare that for a lot of trans men, accessing reproductive healthcare is something that is incredibly intimidating and a space where there's a lot of discrimination. But there has been progress made in that area. There's been, I know with cervical screening, being able to self-test and stuff, and there's been, can't believe Victorian government earlier in the year started the, I think it's the, I don't want to paraphrase, I'm just going to check. The unsaid says a lot, which is all about sort of like body language and sort of not just, because I think when we think about hate or discrimination, we think about particular phrases, and vilification of trans people can be quite creative. Often it can come across as like love, or like, you know, if you do this and you repent and be saved. So I think for me, we've got a good legal framework. We've got some good tools, and I think the Victorian government and agencies within Victoria want to continue to ensure that trans people have good whole existences, but there's a bit of a gap between that legal framework and actually being able to use that in society and be able to help trans people be able to live whole lives.
I do find it extraordinary that so much attention is focused on trans people that we're finally going to be counted in the next census in 2026, but the best estimate at the moment is around 2% of the population are trans or gender diverse. That's a very small group to focus so much attention on. And it does also reflect on what you were saying, that a lot of people don't know a trans person, so they do like to ask questions. And so my next question to you is what's something about being trans that you wish people would stop asking or start asking instead?
Okay. There's a few. I think people feel incredibly comfortable asking questions about my body, things that they really ought to be buying me dinner first. It's frankly no one's business, and I would love for people to maybe not it's like if you wouldn't ask a cis person the question, you probably shouldn't be asking a trans person. You know, I'm not asking you how big your dick is or if you're circumcised. Like but I think that instead people should be asking, you know, what can I do? How can I support a trans person around me? How can I raise awareness for the issues that you're going through? How can I support you in any way I can? I think that a lot of people are really struggling, and I think that we need more allies more than anything. Yeah, I don't know. I have a laundry list of little annoying questions, but I'll leave it there to save time.
Do you want to say anything about that, Charlie?
I just wish that there was a little bit more like critical analysis of things that they see or that people see or read. Like the amount of times people have asked me my opinion on kids using kitty litters at school, which was, I think, an internet meme or something that had been, I believe it was actually, there was kitty litter at a school as part of a lockdown procedure for gun violence in schools, and that had then been morphed into that children are pretending to be cats, and that is the most asked thing of me. Like, so I think sometimes just a little bit more, if you see something or read something or engage with something, just be like, is this rational? Before you then find your closest trans person to ask them about kitty litter in schools. Because that stuff is then shared on the internet, and you know, all it does is make trans people seem to be strange or other.
I think that's an extension also of people's attempt to make us more ridiculous, is this weird attack helicopter like type argument that, oh, kids are going to start identifying as cats and then we'll have to accommodate for them in the bathroom. Like, it's silly.
I probably can't let this session go without talking about something which I find ridiculous that we have to talk about. And again, it's a lot of the debate that we see in the media about trans and gender diverse people, and that is sport. It seems to really be an issue that is used to galvanise people against trans people. Can I get your thoughts about participation of trans people in single-sex sports?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the arguments used to... a lot of people feel really passionately about this, and I think what people are actually trying to do when they discuss banning trans women from sports or banning trans people, period, from sports, is they're just trying to create a wedge issue. It is something that a lot of people feel unsure about enough that it is a topic that they can use to then invite more transphobia, invite more transphobic ideas to otherwise, not interested people. But I do think that pretty much every argument against trans people in sport is silly. There is really not that big of a biological advantage being like me, for example. I have been on hormones for how long now? 7 years. I haven't really, I don't have any real physical differences in terms of my athletic capabilities to the average cis woman. And even if I did, there are biological variations in all people that make you better and worse at certain things. It's all quite silly, and it's weird that this is the line that people are willing to draw. And it has led to some really, frankly, hilarious but also quite depressing outcomes, such as the most recent Olympics. There was a boxer, I believe, who was a cis woman, but again, because she didn't look like how people think a cis woman should look, or she had her own biological advantages just genetically, people were calling her a man, saying she shouldn't be allowed to play. I think when you start policing the bounds of what a woman can be and what she's capable of doing, it leads you down some very dark places. Yeah.
And, the idea that sport is a level playing field needs to be questioned. I had the opportunity to talk to Ian Thorpe last year, and I asked him this same question, and he said, I wear size 18 shoes. My feet are this long. My arm span is, twice of yours. I have a huge advantage over other swimmers just because of my, biology and how my physical attributes. So, to differentiate, when you started hormone treatment or what sex you were designated at birth seems to be, not perhaps the best starting point for trying to level out sports.
And I think it is really important to keep in mind that no one's making that argument in good faith. They have an ulterior motive of trying to motivate more anti-trans thinking in people. And I think also, if you really look at the data, if you look at actual trans athletes, where they're placing, they are not dominating sports. And it's and also it's just an incredibly sexist idea that I could just walk in, me and a completely untrained couch potato could just walk into a women's AFL league and use my super manly Y chromosome to beat everybody. It's silly. It's really, and I think people should be more aware of that, because I think it sounds reasonable when you first hear it, but if you really think about it, it doesn't make any real sense. Yeah. It
is incredibly insidious, though, because this is when I think a lot of these bad actors, they're like, oh, we're speaking up for women, we're standing up for women, we're protecting women, and always that happens in the back of my head. I was like, if you really cared about women, you would use this motivation to talk about, the number of women. It was 104 women who were killed by their current or ex-intimate partners last year in Australia. That's an issue that's protecting, that would be protecting women's safety. So it's really harmful, because we're taking a group of people that still are marginalised in a lot of ways. Women still face a lot of disadvantages in workplaces, in safety. There's genuine concerns. And then instead of acting in good faith on those concerns, they're then pivoting to then target a even more marginalised group of people, and especially another group. You're hurting more women, because then you're hurting trans women. So it's something that just doesn't make sense to me, but is incredibly insidious, because there is still a fair bit of gender inequity in our society as a whole. And I think that's where you can get people who are a little bit on the fence one side. They're like, yeah, I care about women's rights. But it's these bad actors don't actually care about women's rights.
I mean, if you look at some of the biggest voices in the anti-trans movement, particularly around women's sports, like we all love J.K. Rowling, and
Bestie.
she did not say a bloody word about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. She does not really care about women. It is interesting how these people seem to only care about protecting women when it happens to be hurting trans women.
Exactly. I think we're probably in for a bit of a rocky period in the coming weeks. I know that the Australian is publishing an article this weekend that is going to be very anti-trans. We've got the Tickle and Giggle appeal listed for hearing in the, I think this starts on the 4th of August, which is generally going to be a licence for a lot of media attacking trans women. For people in the audience who would like to be better allies for trans and gender diverse people, particularly in this time that we're in now and that's coming, what tips would you give to them? We'll start with you, Isabelle.
Well, that's a big question. I would say that I think just listen to trans people, listen to what they need from you is really important, and that will vary based on the person. I think supporting them, I think a lot of the time as a trans person, at least me personally, and I know a lot of people are similar, these things happening in the background do weigh on you. If it's scary having to just continue living your life while people are talking about you this way and trying to attack your rights. And I think just sort of offering that support, remaining aware of what's happening, don't dig your head into the sand. Yeah, I think that's the best I can say at the moment.
And I might just do a follow-up question. What do you do for self-care during these times? Are you active on social media? Do you step back from that?
For me, sometimes, this goes against the advice I just gave, sometimes I do dig my head into the sand just for a day or two, just because, like, if I just need to get groceries today, I don't want to be thinking about all these awful things, and if that's what I need to do the groceries, then that's what I need to do. But I do prefer to remain aware of those kinds of things and try and do what I can, but sometimes just distraction is the best thing for it.
It's very inconsiderate of the Australian to publish it this weekend. Like, I'm in SWAT back, I have exams starting Monday, so cheers, the Australian. Yeah, it is sort of like, I'm similar with Isabelle, like you want to be aware of what's happening so you don't kind of get caught out, but then it gets hard and it can weigh on you. And I think that's the thing I want people to really take away is that we're people first. We're complicated. Not all of us are fantastic. Some of us do things that are problematic. Some of us, have incredible abilities to advocate for ourselves. Some of us don't. So we are people first. And I think that's, sometimes I know people are afraid to interact with trans people because they don't want to get things wrong or they don't want to misgender someone. And my personal take on things like, pronouns and misgendering is, if it's something that's done because you make an assumption, people make assumptions all the time, it's how our brains work, and you correct yourself when given further information, that's fantastic. If you do something because it's from a place of being malicious or trying to cause harm or discomfort, then that's when I get a bit, cheesed. So I think that's...
And you can tell.
Oh, you can definitely tell.
Like, people, if you don't have hate in your heart as you're doing it, people will see that and they'll, most trans people, I think, will be pretty forgiving.
We've got pretty tough skin, and we just want to get by.
Yeah. All right. I've dominated the questions for some time, so I'd like to now throw it out to the audience who might like to ask a question up the back corner. If you can just wait for the mic to come your way.
Thank you. I did have a question which Paula asked for me about allies and tips for actions taken by allies, but I'll shift that to family members, not just parents, but extended family members. So for both of you, Charlie and Isabelle, what would your advice be regarding parenting and family members? I have a nephew who's just come out as trans, and there are various discussions in my broader family. So what should I advise my mother-in-law and relatives in terms of a supportive response?
My dad likes to tell people that I've died, which is like a strange way, but I think a lot of parents will think like I'm losing one person and gaining another. And that can be quite harmful for a child because you're still the same person, your insides match your outsides. So probably just trying to affirm that child. And there are resources available. I was recently involved with a Ida Hobbit event that was for parents, teachers, extended family members on how to best support your trans and gender diverse young person. So there are resources available. There are trans people available who have spoken on these sorts of topics. And I think I'll pass over to Isabelle to continue.
Yeah, I think as supportive as my family has been, my dad did at the beginning say, actually on national television, that he mourns the boy, which did really suck to hear at the time. And that was just that. I don't think he meant that. I think it was a slip of the tongue. But I think it is important to not treat it that way. It is still the same kid. It is truly just the same. Like it doesn't change anything. I think we tie gender to personhood so much that like we think that we have to like kill off this other version of them in our heads in order to accept them as they are now, but that's just not the case. And I think with my extended family, I think the most helpful thing for me was just that, was to just continue. I didn't want anything to change. I just wanted, just refer to me a little bit differently. Thanks, moving on. It doesn't have to be a whole discussion. It can be nice sometimes, but also the amount of times I had a family member sit down to tell me that they're not going to disown me as though it was like the kindest thing in the world. I'm like, oh my God, thank you. But it's not necessary. You can just continue loving them, continue supporting them as usual. And I think that will be the most helpful. And it's important to keep that kind of stability for them when they're already going through a lot in the early stages of transition.
My auntie, my dad's sibling, she's been one of my most vocal supporters. So having these extended family members, a lot of times she'll go in to bat for me and stand up for me. So, those extended family members can really play a really supportive and affirming and an incredible role, especially in that sort of early period. So thank you for looking out for your nephew.
Another question, we've got one here.
Hi, my name's Lara. When Charlie was talking earlier about documentation, really brings to mind the fact that our legal rights are in everyday jeopardy. It often feels like because they're conditional and patchwork. I didn't have the bad luck to be born in New South Wales, but I was born in Malaysia, and when I asked them about changing my birth certificate, I got an answer back in all caps. And even the Australian government won't accept my passport as evidence of my citizenship. The sport is one area where this discrimination is coming into light. Another place that it happens is in other types of women's spaces. Those are often set up under the Sex Discrimination Act or other legislation that supports women's spaces for advocacy, and often they're set up in ways that are trauma-informed. But some of those spaces are exclusionary of trans women. I've been excluded from spaces like that myself. And a lot of the recent legal cases have been around that. What do you think is a possible legal or other response to this recurring issue around treating trans women as part of the threat and trauma causing and being excluded from women's spaces?
As neither of them are lawyers, I might step in and say something about that. We do have the legislation in Australia that we that does protect against discrimination on the basis of gender identity. And I think some people here and some businesses here have become a bit emboldened about their right to exclude trans women. Based on the For Women Scotland decision in the UK, our law is very different. And our Sex Discrimination Act is nothing like the antiquated Equality Act in the UK. So I think it's not so much that we need law reform as we need education and we need awareness raising. And as hard as it is for people like Roxanne Tickle to be the poster child for the Tickle and Giggle case, that is performing a huge education role. The media that is paid to that case is telling people that it's not okay to exclude a trans woman on the basis that it's only women who are designated as female on their birth certificate that can be admitted. So I hope that answers your question a bit. Another...
To add on Tickle and Giggle, in the judgment, having just a sort of wider understanding of what sex and gender is, and that it's not an incredibly binary thing, it can change and evolve through time, and that we should, that there needs to be education around that, I think, as well. And I think that was a really important thing in that particular judgment.
Yes, and people understanding the difference between sex and gender. It's why I included both words in the title of my book, and the start of the book is actually just 101 explanation of what is sex and what is gender, because a lot of people use the terms interchangeably and they're certainly not.
And chromosomes aren't the only indicator. Like, I think both me and Isabelle have take hormone replacement therapy. So like I'm a testosterone-driven individual. So even though I have two X chromosomes that would usually be a estrogen-driven individual, I'm a testosterone-driven individual. I have a muscle mass closer to a male. I would have an advantage against, even though I'm really, really short, I would have an advantage. So there is, it's a sort of, there's more than just, chromosomes equals this. There's a whole heap of things, and that's part of that education. And I think I just wanted something that Hugh mentioned earlier about, having the community that is affected speaking out. Also making sure that we're having more legal professionals from diverse communities. So for me, it was the Religious Discrimination Act that made me want to become a lawyer, because I could see that, my safety and my partner's ability to work where he wants to work was affected. So that's, yeah.
Charlie doesn't know this yet, but he's quoted in the book because he sent me an email that said, chromosomes are like IKEA instructions. Some people follow them slavishly and others throw them out and do their own thing. And I actually quote that in my book because I thought that's a really colourful way of capturing chromosomes are just one part of what makes us who we are.
And also, on that note, it is like, sex is far less binary than people make it out to be. I think people, they love to point out like chromosomes and sex in general as like this hard facts, like the fact of the matter is, like, someone looking at me, they're not seeing a man. Like, no one's looking at my chromosomes. It's like I'm interacting with the world in a very in a very woman way, and for lack of a better word. And I think that like medically even, a lot of things are far more like anesthesia. I need to tick woman because like my body mass distribution is more similar to a woman's. Like it's just incredibly unhelpful to see sex as like this be-all and end-all. And also, even when you are just looking at sex, intersex people exist. It is not hard and fast like people think it is.
And non-binary people also exist.
Yes.
I think it's very important to note that, like, I'm a binary trans man, Isabelle's a binary trans woman, but there are also non-binary people who face the same and if not more discrimination and exclusion from society. So they're also an important part of the conversation. And I think they can sometimes be even more discriminated against, because I think some people, they can be like, right, you started this way and went to this and started this way and go this way. Yeah, it's easier to understand, whereas I think non-binary people they face a lot more invalidation.
Yep, absolutely. Time for one more question up the back there.
Hi, thank you very much for your insights and particularly for being so comfortable to share with us very generously about your own personal experiences. I'm just curious to get your views on this issue from a social and legal advocacy perspective, and I'm kind of a bit curious about the relationship between the LG part of the community and the T. And I'm curious, do you think that from an advocacy perspective, the trans and gender diverse community are meaningfully and sufficiently supported by the queer and the broader rainbow community, or do you feel that the trans and gender diverse people are also marginalised within these progressive spaces as well?
Great question.
There was an organisation, I think it was LGB without the T, and it was interesting to find that only 10% of that organisation were LG or B. So this sort of like severing off the T is, that's been encouraged, I think, by people who are even from outside the queer community. And I think that there is some sort of survivalism, like if, you know, your rights in, like historically we've had a lot of human rights violations, as we're talking about people being incarcerated for same-sex sexual contact, that, you know, okay, we'll just cast off this group and we'll be okay. And that's sort of like an internal fear that then other groups are really latching onto. And, you know, but if we look at the beginning of the, really the LGBTI rights movement, like Stonewall, like the first person who threw a brick was a black trans woman. So I think that in modern, you know, LGBTI rights, we can't really sever off the trans people, that they were there at the beginning. And I think that there are people from outside the community who are leveraging genuine fear from within the community to then sort of be like, right, break them off and you'll be okay. But we know that that's not going to be, it's not going to work that way.
And I think that I think it's naive to think that they're going to be safe, just because I think, as we've discussed, trans people probably hold the most tenuous spot on the LGBT acronym. It is simply, they're working backward. Like, it's not going to end at trans people. They're always finding new villains. Like, trans people, honestly, right now are in a position similar to like a lot of gay and lesbian people about 20 years ago. It's all, history repeats itself, and if they start working backward on our rights, they will get to them eventually. And I think that politically it is incredibly important that we stick together as a movement, because we are ultimately fighting the same thing.
And they're not mutually exclusive. Like, I am a trans man, but I'm also a gay man. So that because one's about sexuality and one's about gender, there is an overlap, and sometimes you can have some exclusion within communities. So yeah, but it's like, you know, united we stand, divided we fall.
It used to be, the acronym used to be GLBT, and in the 1990s, in recognition of the support that lesbians had given to gay men during the HIV/AIDS crisis when it was at its peak, and the nursing and care that they did, and because of all sorts of feminist principles, they said, let's put the L at the front. I would now love to see the T go at the front, because that is the group that is really being targeted now, and I think there is strength in unity, and we should really be supporting that sector of our community.